Hi guys, here's another one. Mr. Moosetache. Moose had a problem. A horrible, hairy, prickly problem. It grew right below his nostrils and just above his upper lip. A moustache. Now, not a few spare hairs or shy little stubble. No mere weak, wandering whiskers on the upper lip of his moose. No, sir. Moose had a big, bushy, bristly, mighty moustache. But a moustache was a burly, swirly, mangly mess, and it itched a lot. Sure, he plucked and he tweezed. He even clipped, snipped, and teased. But his combs were still cowards, and his brushels rebelled. His scissors simply surrendered. Moose was in a frizzy tizzy. The moustache was completely cramping his style. He was a great hoofer, but he could barely bop and hip-hop with a moustache going flippity-flop. He was a wonderful chef, but he simply could not flamboy his souffle with all those whiskers in his way. He was a daring skier, but how could he downhill race with the mighty moustache blowing in his face? Moose had to do something, and soon. But what? After days and days of much serious thought, Moose got an idea. He crossed some hairs here and he crossed some hair there, and he tied his moustache around his neck. A moose scarf seemed to be the ideal answer to his problems. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect. But then his moustache got knotted and mangled and horribly tangled, and those hundreds of hairs still prickled and tickled. Worse, Moose could barely take a breath with all that moustache wrapped around his neck. So Moose untied, unwrapped, and knotted, and gulped in some fresh air. He had an idea. He got an idea. He parted some hairs this way. He parted some hairs that way. And he heaped all the moustache on top of his head. A mustachioed antlers seemed to be the ideal answer to his problems. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, until a squadron of squirrels and one very nosy gopher moved right in to the Moose Motel. They hurled and hoarded, furled in and burrowed out. Needless to say, it seemed quite crowded up there on Moose's head, and heavy and messy. And very, very noisy. The squirrelies chittering and chatting, squeals and squawks, woke Moose every morning before the crack of dawn. And that gopher was giving the moose one hairy headache. Moose needed his sleep. He needed his rest. He needed his privacy. Moustachioed antlers. Nuts, said Moose. So he unparted, unpiled, untwisted, untwined, and said adios to the hairy horns. But now what? What? The miserable moose took hold of a hunk of hair and he wrestled it, then roped it, and teeter-tied tamed a moose tail. Now that was so simple. That was so easy. That was not so perfectly perfect. Talk about a dizzy do. Moose didn't know if he was coming or going, backwards, forwards, this way, that. He didn't know which end was which. Moose had to bail on the tail. And so he thought and thought and thought some more, but no idea was so worthily winner. Braids were a bother, and Moosetache sweater too sweltering. Not, poor Moose. His problems were truly terrible, unbearable. Just downright sad. He felt so alone. He didn't know what else to do. Then call in fate. Call it destiny. It was probably dumb luck. But one day Moose tripped on his moustache and just had no time to duck. Oomph! Pardon me, they both said as they bumped. Then they blinked. Then they stared, and their hearts went thumpity thump. She was a moose with a bouffant so bodacious, outrageous, well, it was just plain old big. Hair after hair, piled higher than higher, a skyscraper due of gorgeous curls, a tower of swirling twists and twirls. She was simply splendid, stupendous, absolutely superb. Of course, Moose had to ask how she did what she did to get a do. Miss Moose winked and then she whispered, just a little glue. So she helped he furiously plunge and hoof into a fat pop of the white gooey goo, and carefully, oh so carefully, they glooped, and then they plopped. They pasted and they pressed, they coaxed, they curled every truly unruly wayward whisker around and around. They tweaked and they twirled those horrible hairs until Moose, once mangly mess, was now a wondrous winding wave of marvelous moustache. Moose gazed in the mirror and smiled a broad, moosey smile. He was so happy, so glad, so giddy with glee, he looked dashing and handsome. Moose gushed, is that really me? With not a care for one hair, the moose pair boogied and bopped. They skied downhill, even uphill. Their cooking was hot, hot, hot. So of course it wasn't long after that Moose and his Moosetache and his beautiful bride foxtrotted and tangled and waltzed down the aisle. Good hair days, bad hair days, they vowed to love and to cherish. And with hearts heaped with love and pots filled with goop, they both sighed, "I do glue," and promised never to part. It was so simple, so easy, so perfectly perfect, and it stuck. The end. All right, until next time.